One other elected official is represented. Our Congressman, Dana Rohrabacher, is represented by a district director. Kim Vandermeulen is here. Kim, could you just there you are, okay. Welcome, Kim, thanks very much. And we also have at least one city council member here. Rob Schmeed is sitting in the front. Rob, thank you for coming. Let's see if we can move on with towards our speakers. This is just a quick org chart of our team. Funding, of course, from the Coastal Conservancy, Lugano's Foundation. We're kind of like the lead, and then below that, ESA is the firm that we ended up hiring through a competitive bid process. ESA's project manager is Nick Garrity. Nick will be speaking tonight. Part of Nick's team is Matt James, who is a restoration ecologist. He's also here tonight. On the other side, we have a science advisory team, and these folks just kind of happily came along, and we're very glad that they did, because these people have been studying estuaries and the restoration of them for a long time, and they helped us develop the restoration objectives. So we'll be hearing tonight from both Nick and Eric Stein, who led that science advisory team. And I think with that, we're ready to introduce Nick, or Eric will go first. Eric will speak, and then Nick will follow. When they're both done, we'll do Q&A for the two of them, and you'll have plenty of time to ask questions. So let me introduce Eric Stein with the Wetlands Recovery Project.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Ed, and I'm happy to be here tonight on behalf of the Science Advisory Panel and a lot of the other technical folks who've been working on this project. This is hopefully will impress you guys all know why it's a great project for the community, and hopefully we'll try to impress all the great science that's going into supporting the restoration planning. So my role is to really start with a little bit of the regional perspective, and Nick's going to get into a lot of the details about the specific project, and I'm going to just sort of try to set the stage for him in terms of how this system fits into the region as a whole and why we believe this system is so important, not only for the local community but for the region as a whole. So it really is one of these systems that has a much broader impact across the region, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I don't need to probably tell most people in the room, but we've experienced a lot of wetland loss throughout the country, throughout the state, and within the region. And so this map is really a conceptualization of some work that was done a few years ago, where we tried to go back in time and use a lot of historical maps and explore logs and things like that, and really recreate what we thought the coastline looked like around the time of California statehood in 1850. And really, the main thing I want you to sort of take away from this map is that there were a lot of wetlands along the coast, slightly over 300 on this region of the coast from Point Conception to the US-Mexico border. Today, we probably have under 100, depending on whether you lump or split certain systems. So we've definitely lost about 2/3 just by number of systems. But probably the one real important take-home message from this is that if you look at that bar at the bottom, historically we had lots of these small little coastal drainage estuaries, and they're really important for the local species and for the region as a whole. And that's where a lot of our losses have occurred, right? We think about these big, charismatic systems that everybody thinks about, but we tend to think a lot less about the smaller systems. And so this project in particular is a really great example of an opportunity to take one of these systems that's more representative of all these small, important systems we had along the coast and really restore it and use it as kind of a prototype for how we can approach restoration for these smaller systems up and down the region. And so this graphic shows at the top basically that the big take-home message is if you look at 1850 and all the acreage we had and compared to 2005, as I said, we've lost about 75%, we estimate, in total of our wetland area. But the other important graphic I want you to look at is the one on the bottom, which is some work where we've looked across the region at what we expect to happen with several of the sea level rise projections. And so these are sort of two of the standard projections we typically use, and 0.6 meter of mean sea level rise and 1.6 meter. And the take-home message is that if we really don't do anything about this, we'll probably lose about half of our remaining wetlands just to sea level rise. And so what that means is as the blue bar goes up, more of those wetlands become sort of part of the ocean and underwater, and the green and the brown bars, which are sort of the wetland area, those become sort of less in terms of our distribution. So just that rising sea level, if nothing else, with no other impacts, no other development, no other roads, things like that, we'll lose probably about half of what we have left. And so that's a real concern looking to the future. And so we want to think about how to restore these systems in a way so that in the future we still continue to have the wetlands, not only for their benefit and for the species that live there, but for all the other sort of benefits to the community and recreation and shoreline protection and all the benefits they provide. And so the Wetland Recovery Project is, how many of you are familiar with the Wetland Recovery Project? Just by show of hands. Okay, about half. Okay, so the Wetland Recovery Project is, when I work with people around the country and I talk to them about the Wetland Recovery Project, they always tell me, this is such a really sort of unique and great model, right? Because we heard a lot about, you know, what works and what doesn't work in government sometimes, but I'm going to tell you that this is an example of where state and federal agencies have come together and they've sort of formed around 1997, so they've been around for a long time, and they came together and said, you know, we need to work together across our different jurisdictions and our different authorities to cooperate on regional wetland recovery for the Southern California region. And so I've listed all the partner agencies up there, and so they've been working really diligently together over the last, you know, 20 years or so now to do a lot of great things in terms of wetland restoration. And so the program that one of the things that the Wetland Recovery Project has done is said, well, we need to look at this region as a whole and think about regionally what are our objectives for the region. And so they sort of often describe it as kind of the picture on the back of a puzzle box, right? If you think about what do we want the region to look like 50 years from now or 100 years from now, what does that picture look like so that when we restore all of these individual systems, we're not just doing it sort of based on what we think is appropriate for that site, but we're thinking about how it fits into that bigger picture of creating this kind of connected set of wetlands throughout the region. And so that's a lot of work that this group has been doing over the last 4 years, has been really thinking about how to build this connected set of wetlands across the region. And so there was an original regional strategy document that came out in the 2001 and 2002 timeframe, but there's been a lot of new science. You know, the word climate change or sea level rise does not appear once in this document, right? Because in 2000 we weren't thinking about that, right? And so now, because of new science and new understandings and revised priorities and new ability to create quantitative tools and targets, we're able to update this and look at it through a fresh perspective. And so this project that you'll hear more about as Nick comes up is, as I said, a really important linchpin in this larger regional program. And so I want to just finish off by sort of contextualizing one of the ways that this regional strategy has developed is recognizing that we have different types of wetlands in the region. We have some big ones and some small ones, and some that are dominated by more open water and some that are dominated by less open water. And so we've created this sort of typology or this classification of different wetland systems, as you can see by the different colored dots. And on the map, it sort of shows how they're arranged on the coastline. And if you think back to that first map I showed you with all the different size big blue circles and small blue circles, really the goal is we want to have a real diverse set of wetlands up and down the coast. We don't want all of them to look the same. We want a diverse set because different organisms require different types of habitats, and we want to maintain that diversity. And so we've divided them into these sort of 7 systems, and I'm not going to go through them in detail except to say that the Aliso Creek system falls into this small creek mouth estuary, the one that I've listed at the top of the list. And so this is a really sort of imperiled type of system because, as I said before, we tend to overlook it. And so we see this project as a really important opportunity to come into one of these small creek estuaries and really show how to do a really thoughtful and comprehensive restoration program in this system and really set it up as an example so that hopefully in the future we'll be able to have resources to restore many more of these systems up and down the coast. And so these are the regional goals. that have been set forth in this regional strategy that the Wetland Recovery Project has been working on for the last, well, going on 4 years now. And so I'm going to focus on the top one, which it has to do with the restoration of tidal wetlands. The other goals, Nick will talk a little bit about these, but I would sort of support the fact that this project actually supports all of these goals because it has an estuary component, it supports a healthy creek system, it's definitely a big opportunity for education and compatible access, and because we're working in a system we typically don't work in very often, it's going to help us advance the science of how we think about restoring these types of systems. So it's really a great system to support all of these goals, not just the restoration of habitat, which is showing up at the top of the list. And so when we think about these, there's a series of objectives that have been laid out that have numbers behind them. But the point of this slide is really to say that when we think about restoring, we're thinking about not just size, but distribution and diversity and transition zones, which give us that resiliency to sea level rise. And so we're thinking about a regional strategy that encompasses all of these things. And so our long-term goal for the region is at the bottom ultimately to achieve an interconnected mosaic of about a little bit over about 15,500 acres of wetlands of representative sizes and types throughout the region. And so again, this is a really important project that's going to contribute to the larger regional goal. All right. So I've already touched on these, but just to kind of close some of my comments on Melissa. I don't think I need to convince anybody in the room, but if you are a doubter, hopefully you're no longer a doubter, that this is a really excellent example. It has high restoration potential because it's connected with the creek and with the ocean, and we have real opportunities to make those connections stronger and more meaningful. The engaged local community, we heard earlier about the mouth breaching, and when we think about restoration of these projects, what we really want to do is we want to have systems that don't require lots and lots and lots of active management, right? Because that's where things sort of get a little bit dicey. An engaged community is really critical, we believe, to the success of any of these projects is having a really engaged local community, because nobody cares about these systems more than the people who live around them and recreate in them. And so having a restoration plan that really engages the community is really key, and in these smaller systems I think there's a lot more opportunity to really have that strong partnership with the local community. As I said, there's not a lot of examples of these small creek restorations, and so it really creates an opportunity to use this as a demonstration project. So as Ed alluded to, we convened the Science Advisory Panel. Here's the Science Advisory Panel hard at work here at the ranch a couple of years ago, and working on sort of brainstorming, and really the charge of this panel was to come together in a fairly unconstrained way. What we asked the science panel to do is don't think about constraints, don't think about parking lots and road crossings and houses, and just kind of come into this a little bit with an open mind and think about scientifically and technically how would you approach restoration. And constraints will always come in, and we have to deal with those are realities, but we didn't want to start the process with a constrained point of view. We wanted to start the process with a very unconstrained point of view. And so we brought these people in who looked at it, thought about different species that occurred here in the past and what might occur in the future, how the estuary is connected to the creek and to the ocean, and really tried to come up with some ideas about how to approach this restoration from that sort of larger unconstrained picture. And so these are the restoration goals that were developed, which largely, again, they kind of mirror a lot of things we've talked about before, and Nick is going to show you a lot more detail about what these concepts look like. But again, the Science Advisory Panel, I thought it was a real pleasure to work with these folks and really come at it with some innovative ideas and sort of lots of going back and forth, like what if we could do this, or what about this, or is this appropriate, or is that species appropriate? And so that was really, I think, a healthy discussion. And again, it was informed by what we know about the history of the system, so we tried to sort of keep the origins of the system in mind and use that as a touch point for the restoration, as what was here historically and what can we support into the future. We wanted to make sure that we have a long-term view in terms of the long-term resiliency of the system in light of sea level rise. We want to make sure it supports the regional goals that I talked about, so again, it fits well into that picture on the back of the puzzle box. and that we sort of use this as an ongoing laboratory for the community to engage and learn about these systems and to continue to study and learn from our experiences here as we move forward with the project. So with that, Nick's going to go into a lot more detail about these and what it looks like on the ground, and I'll just turn it over to Nick.